When a man who built his entire career on the deal, on the art of leverage, on walking away from the table to make the other side blink first, suddenly reaches across that same table and offers you peace. What is the first question you should ask yourself? Not is this real? That is the wrong question entirely. The question you must ask, the only question that matters in the grammar of power, is what does he get from stopping now that he cannot get from continuing? Because in the architecture of geopolitics, a ceasefire is never an ending. A ceasefire is a door. And the only thing that determines whether that door leads to safety or to a deeper room of the trap is understanding what the man holding it open actually wants on the other side. We are living inside one of the most consequential pauses in modern history, and almost nobody is reading it correctly. On April 7, 2026, Donald Trump stepped back from the edge. 40 days of bombardment. 40 days of the United States and Israel pounding Iranian nuclear facilities, infrastructure, oil terminals, radar installations. 40 days of the world watching oil prices spike, global shipping routes convulse, and the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow throat through which 20% of the world's oil passes every single day, tremble under the shadow of Iranian missiles. And then just hours after Trump threatened that a whole civilization will die tonight, a ceasefire was announced. Pakistan brokered it. Iran allowed the strait to reopen. The markets cheered. Wall Street hit record highs. The White House called it a strategic victory. Stephen Miller, Trump's deputy chief of staff, went on television and said the quiet part with the confidence of a man who does not realize he is being too honest. He said Trump had played the checkmate move. J.D. Vance said Trump doesn't want a small deal. He wants the grand bargain. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, standing at the White House podium, announced that if negotiations failed, the United States was prepared to launch what he called the financial equivalent of a bombing campaign. Do you understand what they are telling you? They are not describing a peace agreement. They are describing a siege with a polite pause built into the middle of it. The bombs have stopped, the economic noose is being tightened, and Iran is being asked to negotiate with a gun that has simply been moved from the temple to the throat. This is not diplomacy. This is the oldest game in the strategic playbook, and it has a name. It is called the false peace trap. And to understand why it works, and why it almost always works on exhausted, battered adversaries who have been sold on the idea that any pause is progress, you have to go back further than this week's headlines. You have to go back to the logic of empires. Think about what the British did in the Boer War. They could not defeat the Boers in open battle. The guerrilla insurgency was bleeding them. So they offered a ceasefire. Terms of negotiation, discussions of autonomy, language of mutual respect. And while those talks proceeded, they built the concentration camps. By the time the Boers realized what kind of peace they had accepted, they were inside a system specifically designed to break their capacity to ever fight again. The ceasefire was not the end of the strategy. The ceasefire was the strategy. Or think about the Romans, because if you want to understand how dominant powers actually think about peace, you need the Romans. When Rome offered a client kingdom a peace treaty, that treaty almost always included provisions for disarmament, for economic dependency, for the removal of the very conditions that had made resistance possible in the first place. The peace looked like respect. It functioned as digestion. The empire did not need to conquer you twice. It simply needed you to agree to the terms of the first time. Now look at what America is asking Iran to agree to right now. Halt all uranium enrichment, not reduce, halt. Accept a blockade of its ports as a continuing condition. Open the Strait of Hormuz as a gift without guarantees. While America runs a mine-clearing operation that gives the U.S. Navy permanent operational presence in those waters, and do all of this while Cam, who is not even involved in the ceasefire negotiations, is still technically the supreme leader, which means the man who controls Iran's ideological apparatus, has not actually agreed to any of this. He simply stopped shooting while publicly claiming that America blinked first. And here is the devastating reality that nobody in the Western press seems to want to sit with long enough to understand its full implications. Cam is not entirely wrong. Iran launched 22 waves of missile strikes. They hit Israeli infrastructure in ways that Israel has tellingly kept from public view. They struck a loud air base in Qatar, a base housing American forces, and caused no casualties, which is either extraordinary Iranian restraint or extraordinary Iranian precision. And neither interpretation is reassuring for American deterrence theory. And then Washington, not Tehran, reached out through Qatari intermediaries. Washington, not Tehran, asked Pakistan to mediate. Washington, not Tehran, was the first to say the word ceasefire. In the grammar of Middle Eastern street politics, in the narrative logic that every bazaar merchant in Thran and every university student in Mashhad instinctively understands, This sequence of events has a meaning that no White House press briefing can erase. The superpower called for the pause. The Islamic Republic kept shooting until the superpower asked them to stop. That story, regardless of what was actually destroyed on the ground, is a story of a different kind of power. The power of endurance, of willingness to absorb punishment, of not flinching first. This is what the Mullers have always understood about America, that America has never fully understood about itself. America can destroy things. America is extraordinarily good at destroying things. But America cannot sustain the political cost of destruction over time. The American public, with its quarterly attention span, its news cycle measured in hours, its politicians measuring everything against the next election cycle, will eventually demand an exit ramp. And whoever controls the timing and terms of that exit ramp controls the outcome of the conflict, regardless of the body count on either side. Iran let itself be bombed for 40 days. This is not incompetence. This is not weakness. This is a civilization that fought Saddam Hussein for 8 years, losing hundreds of thousands of people and never accepted terms of surrender. A civilization that has watched every American intervention in its neighborhood, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, collapse into chaos that ultimately benefited Iran's regional position. Iran does not think in quarters. Iran thinks in centuries. And in the thinking of centuries, 40 days of bombing followed by a superpower asking for a ceasefire is not a defeat. It is data. The data says, America will hurt you badly, but America will not finish you. America will make maximalist demands, but America will eventually need a story. It can sell as a win. And if you can survive long enough to let America find that story, you can shape what the story says. Now, Trump is offering what Vance calls the grand bargain. No nuclear weapons in exchange for Iran's economic resurrection. It sounds generous. It sounds visionary even. But here is what the grand bargain actually requires Iran to give up. The only deterrent that has any chance of making the United States think twice before doing this again in 5 years or 10 years or whenever the next president decides that Iranian behavior requires correction. The nuclear program is not just about nuclear weapons. It is about the credible possibility of nuclear weapons. And that possibility is the only card in Iran's hand that cannot be bombed away because, and Keynes said this with contemptuous precision, knowledge cannot be obliterated from the sky. When Trump declared Iran's nuclear capability destroyed, Keynes' response was 4 words. Let him keep imagining. 4 words that contain an entire strategic doctrine. You can bomb the facilities. You cannot bomb the engineers. You cannot bomb the institutional memory of a program that has been running for decades. You cannot bomb the knowledge that lives inside human beings who, if they survive, can rebuild. And if you give up the program formally in exchange for sanctions, relief, and economic reconstruction, you have traded away your ultimate deterrent for money that a future American president can simply sanction back out of existence the moment your behavior becomes inconvenient again. This is the trap, not the bombing, the peace. The bombing is the part everyone can see. Everyone is watching the craters in Forau, the rubble of Natanz, the satellite images of Isfahan. Everyone is counting the explosions and the missile trajectories and the oil price movements. The trap is invisible because it is wrapped in the language of generosity, of mutual benefit, of economic partnership. It is dressed in the costume of the deal that benefits everyone. But the logic underneath is the logic of permanent subordination. You disarm, we reconstruct you. And from that moment forward, your economy is woven into a system that we control. Which means your behavior will be modulated by your fear of losing access to that system. Which means we have achieved through commerce what we could not achieve through bombs. Which is the permanent management of your strategic choices. And the clock is not neutral. Every day that the ceasefire holds without a permanent agreement, America is running its Strait of Hormuz's mine-clearing operation. Every day the U.S. Navy is consolidating its presence in those waters. Every day the economic sanctions architecture is being refined and expanded with secondary sanctions being threatened against China and the UAE, Iran's remaining economic lifelines. The ceasefire gives America time to build the economic siege. More precisely, it gives Iran time to watch its economy bleed out, its infrastructure unrepaired, its oil exports choked, its people exhausted, and its leadership divided between pragmatists who want any deal and ideologues who understand that any deal on these terms is the end of the Islamic Republic as a strategic actor. Iran's foreign minister has signaled Iran might leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iranian officials have talked of retaining battlefield leverage for lasting strategic gain. These are not the words of a side that has accepted defeat. These are the words of a side that is trying to figure out how to negotiate with someone who has decided that the only acceptable outcome is your permanent strategic disarmament while pretending the conversation is about economic partnership. The world is watching a masterclass in the deployment of overwhelming force, followed by the appearance of magnanimity. It is the oldest sequence in the grammar of empire dressed in the language of the 21st century deal. The bombs establish the hierarchy. The ceasefire installs the terms. The negotiations ratify the hierarchy as a permanent condition. And if the target of this sequence is sophisticated enough to understand what is happening, which Iran is, then the real question becomes whether exhaustion eventually overcomes clarity, and whether a civilization that has resisted external management for 45 years can resist the particular seduction of a peace that looks like dignity but functions like surrender. The answer to that question will determine not just the fate of Iran, but the template for how dominant powers manage rising challengers for the next generation. Because whatever works here will be remembered. Whatever works here will be repeated. The world is not just watching a war end. The world is watching a playbook being written in real time for every future confrontation between a power that can destroy and a power that can endure. And the lesson being taught is not about missiles, but about what comes after the missiles stop and who controls the story that fills the silence.